The alien ship moved slowly through space toward the small red planet that the humans called Mars. Dr. Veltar looked at the screens showing the human research station below. His long blue fingers touched the controls as he studied the readings. The humans had built their little base in a crater near the planet's north pole. It looked weak and simple compared to the mighty ships of the Galactic Coalition. Captain Zixith clicked his sharp mandibles together as he watched the human settlement. His insect-like eyes saw everything in perfect detail. The humans moved around their base like tiny ants, completely unaware that death was coming for them from the stars above. The Coalition had done this many times before. Find a new species, study them for a few days, then remove them before they could become a threat. It was always the same story. The Zephyrian scientist turned to his captain and spoke in the clicking language of his people. The scans show they have basic weapons only. Metal projectiles and simple explosives. Their technology is at least 200 years behind our smallest member, worlds. Dr. Veltar's voice carried the confidence of someone who had seen this scenario play out dozens of times across the galaxy. Down on Mars, Commander Jake Sullivan was checking the morning reports from his security team. The former Marine had been running security for the research station for 3 years now. It was supposed to be a quiet job, watching over scientists as they dug up rocks and studied the thin atmosphere. He never expected trouble this far from Earth. The closest human military base was back on the home planet, months away even with their fastest ships. Dr. Lisa Chang was in her lab, looking at samples through her microscope when the first alarm started ringing. She looked up from her work, wondering if it was another drill. Jake had been running a lot of safety exercises lately, though she never understood why. Mars was empty except for their small team of researchers and support staff. Pete Rodriguez was fixing a broken air recycler when the lights started flashing red. The engineer had been working on Mars for 2 years, keeping all the equipment running in the harsh environment. He knew every sound the station made, every vibration in the walls. This was different. This was real danger. Jake rushed to the command center where the communication officer was trying to make sense of the readings. "Sir, we have multiple contacts approaching from high orbit. They're big and they're not broadcasting any identification signals." The young officer's voice was steady, but Jake could see the fear in his eyes. "How big?" Jake asked, though he was already moving toward the weapons locker. 3 years of quiet duty had not made him forget his military training. "Bigger than anything we've ever built, sir. The computer says there are 12 ships, each one at least a kilometer long." Jake felt his stomach drop. Humans had never encountered alien life before. The discovery should have been celebrated across the solar system. Instead, these unknown visitors were approaching like a military formation. He grabbed his rifle and started shouting orders. "This is not a drill. All personnel to emergency stations. Seal the blast doors and activate the defense grid." The defense grid was not much. A few automated turrets designed to shoot down meteors and space debris. Against whatever was coming down from orbit, they would be about as useful as throwing rocks. Dr. Chang ran through the corridors toward the emergency shelter, her mind racing with questions. Who were these aliens? What did they want? Why had they come to Mars instead of Earth? She clutched her research data, unwilling to leave behind years of work even in the face of the unknown. Pete was in the maintenance tunnels, trying to boost power to the station's shields. The energy barriers were designed to keep out radiation and small impacts, not weapons from advanced alien civilizations. Still, he worked frantically at the controls, knowing that every bit of protection might save lives. Above them, Captain Zixith gave the order to attack. The Coalition ships fired their plasma cannons at the human base. Brilliant blue beams of energy struck the station's shields, overloading them instantly. The humans had put up barriers that could stop cosmic rays and micrometeorites. Against weapons that could melt through starship armor, they lasted exactly 3 seconds. The aliens expected the attack to end there. Standard procedure was simple. Destroy the shields, then send a message demanding surrender. Most species gave up immediately when faced with the overwhelming power of Coalition technology. A few tried to fight back with whatever primitive weapons they possessed, but they never lasted long. Jake Sullivan was not most species. When the shields failed and the station shook under alien bombardment, he did not call for surrender. Instead, he grabbed his rifle and headed for the surface. "Pete, how long until the backup generators kick in?" He shouted into his radio. 2 minutes, maybe 3. came the engineer's voice through the static. Lisa, get everyone into the deep shelters. If they want this place, they're going to have to come down and take it. Dr. Chang stared at him in shock. Jake, we can't fight them. Look what they did to our shields. Maybe not, Jake replied, checking his weapon. But we can make them work for it. The coalition forces watched in confusion as humans poured out of their damaged base. Instead of white flags or surrender signals, they carried weapons. The aliens had seen desperate last stands before, but this was different. These humans were not acting out of panic or fear. They were angry. Pete had rerouted power from the life support systems to the remaining defenses. The station's lights dimmed as energy flowed to the few working turrets. It would not be enough to stop the alien ships, but it might slow them down. Every second could save lives. Dr. Veltar studied his instruments in bewilderment. The humans should have surrendered by now. Their position was hopeless. Their weapons were useless against coalition armor. Yet they continued to fight, using tactics the scientist had never seen before. They had turned their mining equipment into weapons, modified their transport vehicles into mobile gun platforms, and somehow managed to keep fighting even after taking casualties that should have broken any organized resistance, Captain. Zixth was beginning to feel something he had rarely experienced in his long military career: uncertainty. These humans were not behaving according to any pattern in the Coalition database. They fought like cornered animals, but with the intelligence and coordination of a trained military force. Worse, they seemed to be learning from each exchange, adapting their tactics in real time. The battle for the Mars research station had begun, and already the aliens were discovering that humans were going to be far more difficult to kill than anyone in the Galactic Coalition had ever imagined. Dr. Veltar walked through the detention center on the Coalition flagship, studying the human prisoners with scientific fascination. The cells contained a variety of subjects. Marine Staff Sergeant Danny Mitchell, who had been captured after holding off an entire alien squad single-handedly for 3 hours. Paramedic Amy Foster, who had continued treating wounded civilians even while under bombardment. And most puzzling of all, a 17-year-old boy named Tony Rivera, who had been caught running messages between resistance cells through the ruins of Miami. The Zephyrian scientist had conducted similar studies on dozens of conquered species over his long career. Usually, prisoners showed predictable patterns of behavior: fear, submission, attempts at negotiation, or desperate bargaining. The humans displayed none of these normal responses. Danny Mitchell sat in his cell with a broken arm and burns covering half his body. When Dr. Veltar approached with his scanning equipment, the human looked up with eyes that showed no fear, only calculation. "You're the scientist," Mitchell said calmly. "The one trying to figure out why we won't quit." "I am conducting research on human psychological resilience," Veltar replied through his translator device. "Your species exhibits behavior patterns that are inconsistent with standard survival instincts." Mitchell laughed, a sound that made the alien scientist's sensors spike with confusion. "Standard survival instincts? Friend, you don't know much about human history, do you?" In the next cell, Amy Foster was tending to her own wounds with torn strips of fabric from her uniform. She had refused medical treatment from her captors, not out of pride but because she did not trust alien medicine. When questioned about her motivations for continuing to help others during the bombing, she simply said, "That's what we do. When things get bad, we help each other. It's how we've always survived." The most disturbing subject was Tony Rivera. The teenager had been caught carrying crucial intelligence between resistance cells, risking his life to maintain communication networks that the aliens thought they had destroyed. Under interrogation, he showed no signs of breaking, despite being separated from his family and facing an uncertain future. "Why did you volunteer for such dangerous missions?" Dr. Veltar asked the boy. Tony shrugged as if the question made no sense. "Someone had to do it. The adults were busy fighting or taking care of the little kids. I'm fast, I know the city, and I figured I had a better chance than most." Captain Zixith was having his own problems with human psychology. His reports to Coalition Command described a military situation that defied all known theories of warfare. Standard pacification techniques were not just failing, they were making the humans more determined to resist. "Orbital bombardment increases their recruitment rates," he reported in his weekly briefing. "Destroying their cities causes them to become more creative in their tactics. Cutting off their supply lines leads to innovations we did not know were possible. Every action we take to weaken them seems to make them stronger. The captain's frustration was shared by field commanders across the invasion force. Coalition troops were discovering that human unpredictability was not just a minor annoyance but a fundamental challenge to their entire military doctrine. Standard procedures assumed that enemy forces would behave rationally, following logical patterns that could be predicted and countered. Humans seemed to delight in doing exactly the opposite of what made sense. Colonel Ryan Hayes had moved his command center 3 times in the past week, always staying one step ahead of alien search teams. His network of resistance cells had evolved from a desperate survival mechanism into something resembling a functioning military organization. The transformation had happened without central planning or formal coordination. Humans simply adapted to fill whatever roles were needed. "We're fighting a different kind of war than they are," Hayes explained to his communications team. "They're trying to win through superior firepower and technology. We're trying to survive long enough to learn how to beat them." Dr. Patricia Lewis was working in a hidden laboratory beneath the ruins of the University of California. Her research into alien technology had yielded insights that were being shared with resistance cells around the world. The enemy's weapons were incredibly advanced, but they were also specialized and inflexible. Human weapons might be primitive, but they could be modified, combined, and used in ways their designers never intended. "Look at this energy rifle," she showed her assistant while examining a captured weapon. "It's perfectly designed for its intended purpose, but if you try to modify it or use it differently, it stops working. Our weapons are crude by comparison, but we can adapt them for any situation." The psychological impact of prolonged fighting was beginning to show on both sides, but in completely different ways. Coalition forces were experiencing stress, confusion, and declining morale as their easy victory turned into a grinding conflict. Human forces were showing signs of adaptation, learning, and increasing effectiveness despite suffering heavy casualties. Battlefield Commander Thrixall filed reports that his superiors found difficult to believe. Human fighters who should have been broken by weeks of combat were instead becoming more dangerous. Wounded humans returned to battle with improvised equipment and modified tactics. Most disturbing of all, humans seemed to be maintaining hope and determination, even in situations that should have caused complete despair. I observed a human female continue fighting for 6 hours after taking wounds that should have been fatal, Thrixall reported. She used alien medical supplies to treat herself, then returned to combat using captured weapons. When finally subdued, her last act was to destroy the intelligence, data she carried rather than allow it to be captured. The Coalition's intelligence analysis department was struggling to make sense of human behavior patterns. Dr. Veltar's research suggested that humans had evolved psychological mechanisms that were completely unique in the galaxy. Where other species sought stability and predictability, humans seem to thrive in chaos and uncertainty. They do not just survive disasters, Veltar explained to the Coalition High Command via quantum communication. They use disasters as opportunities for growth and adaptation. Their history is filled with examples of catastrophic events that led to rapid technological and social development. Admiral Krexa studied the scientists' reports with growing unease. "Are you suggesting that our attacks are actually helping them?" "In a sense, yes. Each challenge we present forces them to develop new capabilities. They are using our own technology against us, learning from our tactics, and somehow maintaining morale despite suffering losses that would devastate any other species." The revelation came when human forces launched their first major counterattack. Using captured alien equipment and reverse-engineered technology, resistance cells coordinated simultaneous strikes against Coalition bases around the world. The attack succeeded not because of superior firepower, but because of superior intelligence and adaptability. The humans had learned to exploit every weakness in Coalition doctrine. They struck at night when alien sensors were less effective. They used weather patterns and terrain features that Coalition planners had dismissed as irrelevant. Most importantly, they coordinated their attacks using communication methods that the aliens could not intercept or understand. General Alex Stone watched the results of the counterattack from his mobile command post. For the first time since the invasion began, human forces had achieved tactical victories against an enemy with overwhelming technological superiority. The key had been recognizing that technology alone could not win wars. Human creativity, adaptability, and sheer stubborn determination were proving to be weapons that the Coalition could not counter. "We're not trying to match their firepower," Stone explained to his staff. "We're trying to outlast their patience. Every day this war continues, we get better at fighting it." They're still using the same tactics they started with. The Coalition was beginning to realize that they had not just encountered a new species, but a new type of warfare. Humans fought not just with weapons and technology, but with ideas, innovation, and an apparently unlimited capacity for finding new ways to survive. The question that had started as scientific curiosity was becoming a military nightmare. Why were humans so hard to kill? And more importantly, was it possible to kill them at all? Coalition High Command made a decision that had not been necessary in over 3,000 years of galactic conquest. They called in the Void Seekers. These ancient beings existed at the edge of known space, feeding on the fear and despair of dying civilizations. They were older than most star systems and had perfected techniques for breaking the spirit of entire species before moving in for the final kill. Harbinger Mordeth received the Coalition's request with something approaching amusement. His kind had been summoned to deal with stubborn resistance before, but never against such a primitive species. The humans had barely left their home solar system, yet somehow they had managed to frustrate the mighty Coalition for months. It would be interesting to see how long their courage lasted when faced with true despair. The Void Seekers arrived at Earth in ships that seemed to absorb light itself. Their vessels moved through space like shadows, creating fields of psychic terror that had broken the will of countless worlds. As they approached the human homeworld, they began broadcasting waves of fear, hopelessness, and despair designed to shatter the mental defenses of any intelligent species. Admiral Janet Parker was commanding the remnants of Earth's orbital defense platforms when the psychic attacks began. She felt the alien fear washing over her mind like a tide of darkness, showing her visions of humanity's inevitable defeat and the pointless suffering of continued resistance. The mental assault was unlike anything in human experience, designed to convince her that surrender was the only rational choice. Instead of breaking down, Parker found herself getting angry. The visions of defeat only reminded her of what she was fighting to protect. The images of suffering made her more determined to prevent them from becoming reality. She had experienced fear before, during combat missions and natural disasters, but she had learned that fear could be a tool rather than a weakness. "All stations, this is command," she broadcast to her scattered fleet. "We're experiencing some kind of psychic attack. It's trying to make you afraid and hopeless. Remember your training. Use that fear. Let it sharpen your focus." Special Forces operative Sam Brooks was leading a raid on a Coalition supply depot when the Void Seeker influence hit his team. The waves of despair were so intense that several of his soldiers collapsed, overwhelmed by visions of their own deaths and the futility of their mission. Brooks felt the psychic pressure trying to crush his will to fight. But years of military training had taught him to function under extreme stress. "On your feet," he told his team, his voice cutting through their despair like a knife. "This is just another weapon. We've dealt with gas attacks, sonic weapons, and radiation. This is no different. Feel the fear, acknowledge it, then get back to work." Dr. Chang was in her laboratory when the psychic assault reached the underground research facility. The mental attack tried to convince her that all her work was meaningless, that humanity's resistance would accomplish nothing except prolonging their suffering. Instead of surrendering to despair, she found herself analyzing the experience with scientific curiosity. "This is fascinating," she told her research team as they struggled against the alien influence. "They're trying to overwhelm our survival instincts by flooding us with artificially enhanced fear responses. But they don't understand how human psychology works. Fear doesn't paralyze us, it motivates us." The human response to psychic warfare was completely unlike anything the Void Seekers had encountered in their long existence. Species that faced their mental attacks typically experienced mass suicides, complete social collapse, or immediate surrender. Humans instead seemed to be using the artificial fear and despair as fuel for their resistance efforts. Harbinger Mordeth studied the reports from his subordinates with growing confusion. The psychic attacks were having some effect on human forces, but not the effect they were designed to produce. Instead of breaking human morale, the mental assault seemed to be triggering some kind of emergency response that made the humans more dangerous rather than less. Dr. Rachel Green was a historian working with the Resistance, studying human responses to the current crisis by examining similar events in Earth's past. Her research revealed patterns that helped explain why humanity was proving so difficult to defeat. Every major catastrophe in human history had produced innovations, adaptations, and cultural changes that made the species stronger. Look at the Black Death in medieval Europe, she explained to a group of resistance leaders gathered in a hidden bunker. It killed a third of the population, but the survivors developed better medicine, stronger social structures, and more resilient communities. The same pattern appears after every major disaster: ice ages, volcanic eruptions, wars, plagues. Each one makes us harder to kill. The Void Seekers. Psychic attacks were revealing something important about human biology and psychology. Dr. Chang's research team discovered that humans possessed neurochemical mechanisms that could convert fear and stress into enhanced performance. The alien mental assaults were triggering these systems on a massive scale, creating a population that was literally becoming more capable under pressure. It's like they're trying to poison us with our own survival instincts, Chang reported to General Stone. But evolution has given us the ability to turn poisons into medicine. The more stress they put on our population, the more efficiently our brains function. The coalition forces were discovering that their ultimate weapon was not just ineffective against humans, but was actually making their situation worse. Human forces under psychic attack became more coordinated, more creative, and more determined to fight. The artificial despair was being transformed into a kind of focused rage that made human soldiers nearly impossible to stop. Captain Zixth reported to Admiral Krexiza that coalition ground forces were facing human opponents who seemed to be operating beyond normal biological limits. Humans under psychic assault were fighting longer, moving faster, and thinking more clearly than should have been possible for their species. They are using our own weapons against us, the captain reported in frustration. The Void Seeker attacks that should be breaking their spirits are instead enhancing their combat effectiveness. I have never seen anything like it in 30 years of military service. The turning point came when human forces launched a coordinated attack against the Void Seeker fleet itself. Using modified alien technology and tactics developed through months of desperate fighting, human ships struck at the psychic predators with weapons designed specifically to disrupt their mental abilities. Commander Elena Rodriguez led the assault fleet in a ship built from salvaged coalition technology and human innovation. Her crew had trained for weeks to fight while under psychic attack, learning to use the artificial fear as a tool for enhanced awareness and reaction time. As they approached the Void Seeker vessels, the mental assaults intensified, but so did their determination to succeed. Remember what they're trying to make you feel, Rodriguez told her crew as alien despair washed over their minds. Now imagine what we're going to make them feel when we tear their ships apart. The battle against the Void Seekers became a turning point in the war. For the first time, the coalition saw human forces operating at full potential, using every advantage their evolution had given them. The psychic predators found themselves facing opponents who could not be broken by fear, despair, or hopelessness because those emotions had been transformed into weapons. The ancient Void Seekers retreated from Earth after suffering losses they had not experienced in millennia. Their reports to Coalition Command described a species that was not just resistant to psychological warfare, but actually empowered by it. The humans had taken their greatest weakness, their capacity for fear and suffering, and somehow turned it into their greatest strength. Dr. Veltar compiled his final research on human psychology for the coalition leadership. The conclusions were disturbing enough to challenge everything the galactic community thought they understood about intelligent life. Humans were not just another species to be conquered and catalogued. They represented something completely new in the galaxy, a form of intelligence that became more dangerous the more you tried to destroy it. They are not fighting to win in the conventional sense, Veltar explained in his report. They are fighting to survive, and survival is something they have been practicing for millions of years. Every disaster in their evolutionary history has made them better at it. We are not just fighting humans, we are fighting the concentrated survival instinct of an entire world. News of the Mars attack reached Earth within hours through the emergency quantum communication system. Admiral Krexa of the Vortanian Empire studied the reports from his flagship with growing irritation. What should have been a simple cleanup operation had turned into a prolonged engagement. The humans on Mars were still fighting after 6 hours of bombardment, using tactics that made no sense to any military mind in the coalition. On Earth, General Alex Stone stood in the Pentagon's crisis room, watching satellite feeds of the battle raging on Mars. The images showed the human research station in ruins, but the defenders were still shooting back at alien landing craft. He had never seen anything like it. The base's shields were gone, half the buildings were melted slag, and yet his people continued to fight. "How many survivors do we estimate?" Stone asked his aide. "Unknown, sir. Communication with Mars went dark an hour ago, but we're still seeing muzzle flashes and explosions. Someone down there is very much alive and very angry." Dr. Karen Walsh was working frantically in her laboratory at the Johnson Space Center. The wreckage that had fallen to Earth from the alien attack contained technology beyond anything humans had ever imagined. Metal that could repair itself, energy weapons that drew power from space itself, and computers that seemed to think in ways no human programmer could understand. "We need to reverse engineer this fast," she told her team of scientists and engineers. "If they could do this to Mars, Earth is next." Captain Nick Torres was at Edwards Air Force Base, looking at the modified fighters that represented humanity's best hope for survival. His team had worked around the clock to mount salvaged alien energy weapons on human aircraft. The results looked like something from a mad scientist's workshop, but the test flights showed they could actually damage alien technology. "It's not much," Torres told General Stone over the video link, "but it's better than throwing rocks at them." The Coalition fleet commander was having his own problems. Admiral Krexaza had expected to be halfway back to Coalition space by now. Instead, he was preparing for a full invasion of the human homeworld. The Mars garrison had finally fallen after 12 hours of fighting, but not before the humans had destroyed 3 Coalition landing craft and damaged 2 cruisers. No species in the galaxy had ever inflicted casualties on Coalition forces during a pacification operation. The second wave of alien ships approached Earth like a storm front moving across space. There were 50 vessels this time, carrying enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. The Vortanian admiral had decided to end this embarrassment quickly and permanently. Sergeant Maria Santos was in the tunnels beneath New York City when the orbital bombardment began. The underground shelters had been hastily converted from old subway stations and sewer systems. They were not designed to withstand the kind of weapons the aliens possessed, but they were better than staying on the surface. Above ground, the alien plasma beams turned skyscrapers into pillars of fire. The Hudson River boiled where energy weapons struck the water. Times Square became a crater filled with molten glass, yet somehow people were surviving. The deep shelters held. The emergency communication systems kept working. And from hidden positions throughout the city, human weapons began shooting back. Ben Clark had been a construction foreman before the invasion. Now he was leading a group of survivors through the ruins of downtown Chicago. They had learned to move through the rubble like ghosts, striking at alien patrols and disappearing before the enemy could respond. The aliens had superior technology, but they did not understand cities the way humans did. "Every building is a fortress," Clark told his people as they prepared for another raid. "Every street is a killing ground. This is our world, and we know it better than they ever will." The Coalition ground forces were experiencing something completely new in their military history: effective resistance from a technologically inferior species. The human defenders had turned every city into a maze of ambush points and death traps. They used the aliens' own weapons against them, modified human technology in impossible ways, and somehow maintained communication and coordination, despite having their command centers destroyed repeatedly. Captain Zixith landed with the third wave of troops in what had once been Los Angeles. His soldiers were veterans of a dozen pacification campaigns, equipped with the finest weapons and armor the Coalition could provide. They expected to be hunting scattered refugees through the ruins. Instead, they found themselves in a running battle with organized human forces who seemed to know exactly where to hit them. The humans had learned something important about their enemies. The aliens relied too heavily on their technology and not enough on their intelligence. Coalition soldiers followed predictable patterns, used standard tactics from their military manuals, and could not adapt when those methods failed. Humans, on the other hand, had been forced to innovate from the moment the first alien ship appeared. Dr. Chang had survived the Mars attack and been evacuated to Earth just before the planet fell. Now she was working with Dr. Walsh to understand alien biology. The enemy prisoners they had captured revealed disturbing information about coalition society. These beings had been conquering other species for thousands of years, but they had never encountered anything like humanity. Look at this. Chang showed Walsh the brain scans of a captured Zephyrian soldier. Their neural patterns are completely different from ours. They think in rigid, hierarchical structures. When something doesn't fit their predetermined categories, they literally cannot process it. That explains why they keep using the same tactics even when they're not working, Walsh replied. But it also gives us an advantage. If we can stay unpredictable, we can keep them confused. The battle for Earth was entering its second week. The aliens controlled the skies and most of the major cities were in ruins, but humanity had not surrendered. Instead, they had adapted. Underground networks connected resistance cells across continents. Captured alien technology was being reverse-engineered and turned into hybrid weapons. Most importantly, human morale remained high despite suffering losses that would have broken any other species. Colonel Ryan Hayes was coordinating resistance operations from a bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. His communication screens showed reports from surviving military units around the globe. The news should have been devastating. Millions dead, entire cities destroyed, governments collapsed. But buried in the casualty reports were other statistics that told a different story. Alien losses are mounting, Hayes told his staff. They've lost more ships and soldiers fighting us than they have in their last 10 conquests combined. We're not winning, but we're making them pay for every inch. The coalition was beginning to realize they had made a serious mistake. Admiral Crexisa received reports from his ground commanders that made no military sense. Human forces that should have been destroyed were reforming and counterattacking. Resistance cells that had been eliminated were somehow reappearing with new equipment and fresh fighters. Most disturbing of all, the humans seemed to be getting better at fighting as the war continued. While coalition forces were becoming less effective, Dr. Veltar was studying human prisoners in an attempt to understand what made them so difficult to defeat. The subjects included captured soldiers, civilians, and even children. What he found challenged everything the coalition thought they knew about intelligent life. They have redundant biological systems, he reported to Admiral Crexa. Their bodies can function with damage that would kill most species. But more than that, they have psychological mechanisms that allow them to continue operating under conditions that should cause complete mental breakdown. The Admiral studied the report with growing unease. Are you saying they're genetically engineered for warfare? No, sir. They evolved this way naturally. Their entire species appears to have been shaped by millions of years of surviving disasters, conflicts, and near-extinction events. They don't just endure hardship, they become stronger because of it. As the third week of fighting began, the coalition fleet found itself facing something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that became more dangerous the longer you fought them. The humans were learning, adapting, and somehow turning every defeat into a lesson for future victory. What had started as a routine extermination was becoming a war, and for the first time in coalition history, the outcome was far from certain. The coalition faced a crisis that threatened the very foundation of their galactic empire. For the first time in their history, they were losing a war of extermination against a species they had initially dismissed as primitive. Admiral Crexisa stood before the coalition high command, attempting to explain how the most advanced military force in the galaxy had been stopped by beings who still used chemical rockets to reach orbit. Ship Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded a fleet of vessels that should not have existed. Her ships were built from captured coalition technology, reverse-engineered alien components, and human innovation that defied every known principle of military engineering. The fleet looked like something assembled by scavengers, but it had already proven capable of destroying coalition cruisers and even damaging the mighty Void Seeker vessels. We're not trying to build perfect ships, Rodriguez explained to her engineering crews as they prepared for another strike against alien forces. We're trying to build ships that work, that can be repaired with whatever we can find, and that can do things the enemy doesn't expect. Dr. Veltar completed his comprehensive analysis of human capabilities and transmitted it to Coalition Command with a sense of deep unease. His research had revealed that humanity's strength was not just biological or psychological, but fundamentally cultural. where other species developed civilizations designed to maintain stability and avoid conflict. Humans had built societies specifically intended to help them survive and overcome disasters. Their religions teach them that suffering leads to strength, Veltar reported. Their philosophies emphasize adaptation and growth through adversity. Their educational systems train each generation to solve problems that have never existed before. They have created a civilization designed to turn every setback into an opportunity for advancement. The revelation came from human ambassador Frank Morrison, a former Marine who had been captured during the battle for Luna and was now representing Earth in what passed for diplomatic negotiations. Morrison had survived 3 separate coalition attempts to break his will, emerging from each experience with a better understanding of alien psychology and tactics. "You want to know why we're so hard to kill?" Morrison asked the coalition negotiators during a brief ceasefire. "It's because we've been practicing. Every ice age, every plague, every war, every natural disaster. They all taught us something about survival. You're not fighting humans. You're fighting 4 billion years of evolution that produced a species specifically designed to survive anything the universe could throw at them." Coalition Commander Vexra made the decision that would haunt the galaxy for centuries to come, frustrated by months of unsuccessful fighting and facing political pressure from member worlds questioning coalition military competence. He authorized the use of antimatter weapons against Earth itself. If humanity could not be defeated conventionally, they would be eliminated completely. The antimatter bombardment succeeded in devastating Earth's surface and killing billions of humans. From space, the planet appeared to have been sterilized completely. Coalition forces celebrated what appeared to be their final victory against the stubborn human species. The celebration lasted exactly 6 hours. Engineer Lisa Park emerged from a hidden base on the far side of the moon, leading a group of survivors who had been preparing for exactly this scenario. Marine Colonel Steve Johnson activated sleeper cells throughout the solar system that had been established during the early days of the invasion. Across human space, from asteroid mining stations to research outposts on the outer planets, the survivors began to move. "They made a mistake," Park transmitted to the scattered remnants of humanity. "They thought destroying our world would break us. Instead, they just freed us from having to defend a fixed position. Now we can go on the offensive." The coalition discovered too late that they had not eliminated humanity, but had instead created something far more dangerous. A species of survivors with nothing left to lose and intimate knowledge of coalition weaknesses and technology. The humans had spent months studying their enemies, learning their languages, mapping their territories, and identifying their fears. The revenge campaign began within weeks of Earth's destruction. Human survivors appeared throughout coalition space like ghosts, striking at infrastructure, communications, and supply lines with weapons and tactics that no other species had ever developed. They fought not as conquerors seeking to build an empire, but as a force of nature seeking to ensure their own survival. Coalition worlds that had never seen warfare in thousands of years suddenly found themselves under attack by small groups of humans who seemed able to appear anywhere, strike at will, and disappear before effective retaliation was possible. The attacks followed no conventional military pattern because they were not intended to capture territory or defeat armies, but simply to make the coalition pay an ever-increasing price for their decision to eliminate humanity. Dr. Chang had survived the destruction of Earth and was now working from a hidden laboratory in the asteroid belt, developing new weapons and technologies using captured alien equipment. Her team had discovered ways to modify coalition technology that its original designers had never imagined, creating hybrid systems that combined the best of both human and alien engineering. "We're not trying to rebuild what we lost," she told her research team as they worked on a new type of ship that could travel between star systems using modified alien drive systems. "We're trying to build something better, something that can survive anywhere in the galaxy." The psychological impact of human survival spread through coalition space like a plague of fear. Species that had lived under coalition protection for millennia suddenly realized that their protectors could be defeated, their technology could be stolen and improved upon, and their entire way of life could be threatened by a handful of determined survivors. Coalition High Command found itself facing a problem it had never encountered before: how to fight an enemy that had no fixed territory to defend, no centralized government to negotiate with, and no apparent desire for anything except survival and revenge. Traditional military strategies were useless against opponents who treated the entire galaxy as their battlefield. The humans had learned something important during their fight for survival. The coalition was not invincible. Their technology could be countered, their tactics could be predicted, and their morale could be broken. Most importantly, their member species were not united by genuine loyalty but by fear and convenience. If that fear could be redirected toward the coalition itself, the entire empire might collapse. Frank Morrison broadcast a message to every world in coalition space using captured communication equipment and alien broadcast systems. His words reached billions of beings across thousands of worlds, many of whom had never heard of humanity until the invasion began. "We are the humans," Morrison's message began. 6 months ago, the coalition decided we were a threat to galactic peace. They were right. We are a threat to any system based on conquest, oppression, and the elimination of species that refuse to submit. We survived your attempt to exterminate us, and now we're coming for you. The message continued with a detailed explanation of human capabilities, coalition weaknesses, and evidence of other species that had been eliminated or enslaved during thousands of years of galactic conquest. It ended with an offer that terrified coalition leadership. Humanity would help any species that wanted to break free from coalition control. Coalition worlds began experiencing something unprecedented in their history. Rebellions inspired and assisted by human survivors who seemed able to appear anywhere in the galaxy. The humans brought with them advanced technology, military expertise, and most dangerous of all, the absolute certainty that any enemy could be defeated if you were willing to pay the price in blood and determination. The final scene of the human resistance took place on a coalition world that had never known warfare. A dying coalition scientist wounded in a human raid on a research facility asked the question that had haunted the galaxy for months. Why are humans so hard to kill? The human standing over him was a young woman who had lost everything in the destruction of Earth, but had somehow managed to travel across interstellar space to strike back at her enemies. Her answer became legend throughout the galaxy, repeated in whispers by species who had begun to dream of freedom. "Because we've been practicing for millions of years," she said, her voice carrying the weight of an entire species' worth of suffering, adaptation, and survival. Every disaster, every war, every catastrophe that should have killed us only made us better at staying alive. You thought you were fighting humans, but you were really fighting evolution itself. And evolution never stops, never surrenders, and never forgives. The coalition would spend the next century learning what it meant to have an enemy that could not be negotiated with, could not be intimidated, and could not be killed. Humanity had become something new in the galaxy, a force of nature disguised as a species, spreading across the stars not as conquerors but as survivors, carrying with them the most dangerous idea in the universe, that any oppressor could be overthrown if you were willing to never give up.